Hello, my name is Hamish Sewell and I'm the founder and the primary producer with the location-based storytelling app called Soundtrails. And today we're coming to you live in conversation with Andrew Parker from the Uralla community. Andrew was formerly the president of Uralla Arts, and we're having a bit of a chat today about where all the story businesses come from with Uralla. Good morning, good afternoon, Andrew.
Good afternoon, Hamish.
Andrew, before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the custodians of the land where we're both speaking, because I think this idea of stories, connection to land is so important. I'm speaking here from the Sunshine Coast, and it's Cubby Cubby territory, and just slightly south of here we've got the Jinnaburra mob. Andrew, where are you speaking from?
I'm speaking from Anawan country in Uralla here, and it's land that's shared custodians are the Gumbaynggirr, the Gamilaroi, and the Dunghutti people.
And of course, we'd like to acknowledge the elders, the past, present, and emerging. Sorry? Okay, so today we're going to be talking about where Soundtrails has come from in the whole mix, because Soundtrails has been going for nearly 8 years, and we of course started in little old Uralla. And this is why we're having this conversation today, because without the man who I'm talking to, without Andrew Parker, this project would have never got up off its knees. Andrew, where did it all begin with you and I?
Look, well, I think for me, living in Uralla for as long as I have, since the mid-80s, ever since I can remember, people have been saying, we've got to capture so-and-so on tape before he pops off. And someone would say, oh, look, there's a cassette of him talking. So I'd say, and where is it? Well, it's in Aunt Cecil's trunk. And so it would never be accessible. So when the opportunity came along to do a more professional job of storytelling, I really jumped at it. It wasn't something I went looking for. In fact, I met your partner, Hamish, Helen, at a funeral in Queensland, and the guest of honour knew that he was going to be the guest of honour, and he recorded several stories with Helen and with his wife in conversation. And Helen gave a eulogy at the funeral and talked about the process, and it really piqued my interest. And I thought, as soon as the service was over, I talked to Helen and said, do you want to come to Uralla and record some stories? And she said, sure, but we'll need to get some money first. So we, about 2 months later, Helen called and said, look, there's an opportunity to go for some funding. And we went through an application process and gained a significant amount of funding, and that's how the Uralla Story Project came into being. So I think we recorded 40-minute conversations.
Yeah, and I think if I remember rightly, we were using a conversation model, weren't we? We were using this idea of bringing two people together where there's a kind of an agreed focus of the conversation, and we'd give them 40 minutes and then they would sort of go for it, really, wouldn't they? Yeah.
Look, some conversations work better than others. I think the less people knew about storytelling, the better job they did of it, because they didn't have any preconceptions about questions and answers. And I think the two shearers, who I think we're going to hear from later on, were a great example of that. Two guys who just sat down and launched into it.
Yeah. I mean, what was that like, do you think, for a community, a small community like Uralla, to suddenly be invited to share, I think, what were sometimes quite intimate, quite personal, quite close stories that are really lie at the heart of that community. What do you think that was like for you guys?
Look, I think we really saw it as an opportunity. A lot of the people we recorded, people seem to think that they didn't have a story. And what you kind of end up talking to them about is that everyone has a story, and some are more interesting than others. And we got some crackers, we got some great stories, and it was a great opportunity to do a huge body of work all at one time, and it's set us up now with a bit of a legacy and a bit of a model for recording. Now, it's 8 years since we recorded those stories, and it's long past as the time that we should have recorded more, and I think it won't be much longer before we do record more stories.
So why don't we jump into the sharers? Do you want to give us a bit of an introduction to what's going on here?
Look, these were two old fellas who neither of them are with us anymore. And that's quite a typical thing with the collection of these stories. A lot of the storytellers are no longer with us. And in fact, some of the buildings that we talk about are either, about the resurrection and saving of buildings, and some buildings have also passed, and some are probably soon to pass, unfortunately.
Look, there we've got the picture of them right there. Oh, they've just disappeared on us. And so now it was Richie, and it was Richie Shanahan and Bill Barraclough. And do you remember the day they came in, Andrew?
I don't, because I wasn't there.
I was. Well, in that case, it's a rhetorical question, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, look, they came in, and honestly, I don't know how they'd sort of heard about the recording project, but they came in and it was like, yep, okay, let's get into it. Just let's get into it. No bells and whistles, no consent forms, no cups of tea. They just really wanted to march into it. So based on that, I'm going to play now for the listeners a story which has actually ended up on the Uralla Soundtrail, but it originally came from the story project, which we did with Andrew and the arts community. And let's just see how we go here. Guys, are we ready to go with this? Okay.
Oh, dear God, I don't know. She's changed a hell of a lot, Bill. Like in our time, well, we are down to the Narracombs, which were, in my opinion, the best. Well, there's a lot of them now. They're shooting 200-300 a day. But I'll tell you what, you have a look at them. They don't look near as well as gone. And have a look at the wall.
Yeah, the other day I see a bloke cheering 76 run at Williams, how
but they had the sheep look.
No, they looked all right for us.
Some of them can cheer them.
Oh, yes. Well, they learn with them young ones, like they hold them all together different than what we did from under the armpits. See, they've got to stick them between their legs now, something like crutching. And
that's right, of course.
when you're in position, out of position, or they're not one to sit up and just let you take it off them.
No. Now, at times I think they'll hit them with tranquilizers,
Yeah.
I think. Make them sit a bit still.
It was a hard old grind. From the time the bell rang till you finished,
Daylight saving didn't do much for us either.
No. Yeah, you'd be leaving at 5:30 in the
That's
morning.
right.
A couple of hours drive to get there without a couple of hours back late in the afternoon. You're coming home, you're getting sunburnt coming home with the daylight saving.
You wouldn't even get back in time to have a beer.
No.
They'd be closing at 6.
There was no beer and no cheese and
No.
Eh?
No, you had to have a bit of cheese. That's the only thing to keep a man going.
Yeah. All them big sheds, they're all gone now, Richie, see? They're into cotton and bloody odds and ends.
That's right, cotton or cattle.
Cattle.
Yeah, but it's unreal, when you think about the amount of sheep and good wool sheep. We used to be out around Salisbury.
Oh, well, it was the home of the fine wolves, weren't they?
It was.
Like, they were best in the world. You take like Queen Lee and
Well, that's right.
Glenmore.
Yeah, all them.
All Taylor's there, Terrible Vale.
Yep.
Bloody
Yes.
old Teddy Cole there, having their bloody coats in the pub showing you, wouldn't they?
Oh,
Showing you
yeah, you can
fire
say
them,
that again.
Take and have a look at
Yes,
this.
yes, flicking it and going on.
Yeah, you'd be trying to forget about shooting, they'd be showing you all the wool. They've got 16, 17 micron, see?
Yes. Well, I heard the other day when they said that there was a bale of wool sold 11 micron. Unreal, the
Yeah.
price. 11 micron. To get it down to 11 micron.
Micron now. She's very fine, isn't she?
You couldn't believe it.
Okay, so we're still there, Andrew?
Yeah.
We managed to make that. So the thing that I love about this piece is that it's a real sense of local vernacular, and it's one of those sharing stories that on the one hand it must be everywhere across Australia, this idea of two sharers having a bit of a yarn. But on the other hand, you really don't really hear men talk like this very often, do you?
It was I found it quite an intimate story. There were a couple of old fellas who obviously knew each other very well, very fond of one another, and particularly towards the end of the story, they start kind of trailing off a bit and start musing about their time left on Earth. And it's just beautiful. They just trail off into the fact that they're still on the right side of the grass.
That's right. I think they talked about the pub fights there for a while and hiding the bottles outside some of their bush dances.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think we've got them in the arts. What's it called? The arts place, the hall.
The Oddfellows Hall.
The Oddfellows Hall in Uralla, and we've got the Barry McDonald talking about the musicians that were around the Uralla region, and we've also got these guys having a yarn about the bush fights, the pub fights.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about the Oddfellows Hall dances, they weren't allowed booze in the dances, and so they used to stash it in the hedge outside.
That's right.
So they have to go out and have a swig and check to see that no other bastard had swiped their bra.
Oh, no. And I think the thing that I loved about that was that, you know, I mean, we've got some fantastic stories from Uralla, some really cracker stories, but these guys came in and they were just so unguarded about what they said. And they just really wanted to yak. You know, whether it was talking about the possums peeing from the rafters in the cinema, the pub fights, or you know, kind of what it was like to survive daylight savings as a shearer.
Yeah. No, that was they were one of my favourites.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how would you sort of describe the collection as a whole, Andrew, that we recorded with the Uralla Story Project? How would you describe that collection?
Look, what I really like about it is that it's quite in depth. 40 minutes gives people a chance to really get into their stories. And one of the stories that another of my favourites is Peter Phillips, who had a toy and gun shop in Uralla. And he and his wife Helen talk at length about their courting, and it's just a beautiful love story.
I think we've got a picture of them, actually. We're just going to look for a picture and see if we can put that up. So what was it about that story that appealed to you, Andrew?
Look, I think it was the intimacy. It was really the genuine love and fondness that they had for one another and for the memories.
That's it. That's the one. So we've got a picture of them coming up now. It was. It was a beautiful portrait of a couple falling in love, and we've got them talking as an elderly couple about that time when they first met. Yeah, it was a beautiful piece, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they talk about Peter retiring and suffering depression after he retired for a while, but you know, he got back on his feet, and he's. I mean, it's quite a long time since they, I think it's 2007 they retired, so it's quite a while ago now.
Okay, now I'd like to come to one of the next stories that we've got, which we recorded from the Uralla Story Project. And I just want to make a little warning here to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people that this concerns an image of someone who's passed away, and maybe just not look at this if you feel that that might be disturbing. So who are we dealing with here, Andrew? Who are we talking about?
We're talking about Bob Faulkner, who grew up on the Panhandle, which is an area of land just to the southwest of Uralla. And it would be 2 or 3 kilometres outside of the town limits. And so Bob talks about coming into town in the old car stacked with, adults and kids, people on the running boards and, great yarn. He's a lovely storyteller.
He was a lovely storyteller, and let's go to him now. So I'm just going to bear with me while I again share my screen, and we've got Bob here, and
given miners' rights to live on certain little parcels of land, and there was about 20 houses out there, and the area out there became known as the Panhandle, and it still is known as the Panhandle. They used to call the panhandlers the people who handled the gold mine, the gold pans.
Yeah, right.
There was 10 huts, there was a couple of bark huts. Most of the huts were made out of scantling timber from the sawmills. And sometimes you go over the rubbish tip and get second-hand tin and things like that and make nice little cabins, little huts to live in. Mm-hmm. But there was quite a number of Aboriginal people out there. And my mother was born there, as most of her family was, and uncles and aunties, and my father was born out there also. We used to get the wool packs from the old shoeing sheds, and in the lines of the wool packs were fairly like a blanket. In those days they had these big Hessian wool bags, wool packs they used to call them, but it'd be fairly heavy too if you had 8 of them on top of you, and you wake up in the morning you'd be tired from all the weight on top of you. You'd be buggered because you're laying on these heavy wool packs all night.
Yeah, right.
Sometimes we put a few dogs in bed with us, keep us a bit warm.
Yeah.
And Dad used to joke and he'd say, it's a 2-dog night tonight, it's been the big frost. It was a 3-dog night. The bigger the frost, the more dogs you got, so. And then we moved into a 1939 Ford car body. It was really good. And it was nice and warm in there because it had glass. An old car body was laying there. I've got photographs of it somewhere. And there used to be...
was it like a van?
No, it's a car,
Just a car?
like a Ford car.
Yeah.
It glass. Well, first of the glass windows, in 1930 it was, and they had no wheels on it. It used to be laying there next to the house, and that was wrecked there. So we used to have all the bags and kids in there, and there's about 5 of us used to sleep in, a couple of cousins, maybe 2 brothers and I. We travelled many miles in our car. I remember during the day we'd sit there in the cold winter day, sitting out there driving it up and down the street, and make it out we're driving, and froth flying out our mouth, make it out there driving it, sitting on the seat, because it had a steering wheel in it. And
Yeah.
it was a great toy thing too. It was a real car, but it never had no engine or anything. But it was all there, and the doors and the windows on it, and we used to wind the windows up and down. We thought it was great. And it was nice and snug in this car body. It was beautiful. Especially if you could wind up the windows, because the old house here was full of cracks and the boards were about half an inch apart. You could see through the holes. But anyhow, that was a great experience, the old car body. And I remember one night we were in there and we had the fox terriers. Everyone had it. A lot of them kids had fox terriers, and they had a few fox terriers in there, little white dogs, and they were good little rabbits, because everyone had their own rabbiting dogs there. Mm-hmm. And we didn't know, but in this car body, in the horsehair seats, the seats were all lined with horsehair. It's very heavy, black, reddish-looking hair, and that's how they used to make them in those days. And there was a rat's nest in there, and of course the fox terriers are mad ratters, so they used to chase the rats, and they started canning on in the middle of the night, and there was a hell of a bloody thing of kids flying out the door and dogs around and chasing this rat around the thing, and a rat, they're screaming, carrying on. And the dogs ended up getting the rat, that upset the things for the night.
So the thing that I love about Bob talking is that we've really got this sense that we're getting voices and stories from people who wouldn't normally be included in those sort of mainstream storytelling collections. Would you agree with that?
I would. Look, Bob was a remarkable man. He was he he worked in, I think he started his working life in the Uralla post office, but he rose quite high within the public service, working for the federal government in Aboriginal affairs. And so he achieved great things in his life. And in the latter years, he was a very avid bird watcher. And he had a Facebook site with his bird watching exploits on there.
He was a real twitcher. Andrew, I'd like to now to come to this idea of how we got to the Uralla Soundtrail, and because the Uralla Soundtrail was the first in our cohort of Soundtrails. Do you remember what precipitated this?
Look, when we were, because you used to come down and stay with me, you and Helen would come down and we'd work during the day and then have dinner at night. Helen would invariably go off to bed and we would talk and talk. And we started talking about, you started talking about these, I think it was, what did they call it? What was the jargon that surrounded geolocative sound stories?
Yeah, locative apps.
Locative apps. There was another.
I'd been to Sydney, and I'd been at a conference at the ABC, and I'd kind of discovered that there was this technology to get these things out onto the street.
Yeah. Augmented reality.
Oh, was it augmented reality?
There were many jokes about augmenting our realities.
Right. And I think the idea was that we kind of felt that it was a really great cache of stories, but if they just go into an archive in the library or even just on a website, there's this sense that people are a bit dislocated from them. And to have people actually listening to some of these voices and stories on the streets of Uralla was something that we were really keen to explore.
It was. It was all new to me, and I kind of realised that I wasn't going to do it, and my job was really to encourage you.
So I think we then put in for a horrendous grant, which was like pulling teeth, but we were successful in getting it through Federal Heritage, I think, weren't we?
Yeah.
And then therein we began building this thing called Soundtrails, which was something of an experiment, I have to say.
Yeah, look, I remember being in on phone hookups where I would understand hello, Andrew, welcome, and goodbye, Andrew, nice to talk to you. But the stuff in the middle was just complete double Dutch to me. I didn't understand a damn thing that people were talking about because it was very technical.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
The back end.
The bloody back end.
I never knew that the computer had a back end.
No, me either. But suddenly the back end becomes extremely important.
Yeah.
So let's go to one of the stories that we did in the Uralla Soundtrail, which is called the Call to Arms. It's the Call to Arms story, and I'll just see if I can get rid of that. And here we have it here. I'll just move that over. So thanks all you who are listening for your patience here. Now, the Call to Arms story, Andrew, do we want to say anything about this one?
Look, this wasn't a story that was involved in the Story Project stories, so I didn't have a lot to do with this one. I think the really interesting thing about this is we're moving now into they're like produced stories with music, and this one has original music by local musicians in Armidale, and they're like taking the stories and building a pop song out of it. They're like 3-minute fully produced stories.
Yeah. I mean, in this case, this one's 5 minutes, 16 seconds. We won't play all of that today. But I think just to give the listeners a bit of a background to this, we discovered these documents with some of the archivists at the UNE archives, and they were what they call to arm documents, where the government was pressuring people to sign up in the First World War. And I think it was later on in the First World War where a lot of people had lost loved ones, had lost their kids, and they were putting pressure on young men in regional towns like Uralla to sign up. And so they sent this document out to these small regional towns like Uralla, and you had to justify why you wouldn't sign up in 1917, which of course was the time of the worst of the bloodbath in the First World War. And it didn't meet with a particular warm reception in Uralla. Now, Uralla and I think somewhere in Tasmania are two of the only places that still have these documents around. So they're quite rare, and based on that, I thought that was a really great premise for building a story, not only to sort of map out what the pressure was that were on young men, but also the readings, some of the replies that the men made to the call to arms government officials. So I'll start in here just a little bit in. And again, the music is from a local Armidale band called Caution Horses, I think they were, weren't they, Andrew?
That's right, yep.
Yeah. Okay, so here we go.
Members, they understand very well what might happen to them should they tick the box that says yes.
Cyril Robson Browning, 25, unmarried, number of dependents 9, occupation farmer.
The call to arms itself is trying to encourage people to enlist, but what the form itself tells us, or asks people to tell authorities, was something about their age, marital status, the number of dependents that they had on them, their health, and then they were asked whether they would enlist. In the event of that decision not to enlist, the recipient of that form is asked to account for why they would not enlist.
I'm willing to enlist at a later date, but not before Germans are prohibited from joining the colours. And also when something is done to shift some of those useless, loafing, post-polishing wasters from the cities who do nothing but live on the racecourse.
And especially in a place like Uralla, the men who are filling out these forms will, in all likelihood, at least know of the people on the recruiting committee. Certainly in those rural communities, it's much easier to see who has gone and who hasn't gone, and to start making accusations about which families have contributed something and which families are not contributing.
John Charles Blackall, born 1883, married, 2 children, good health. Occupation, journalist.
Enlisting in the armed forces is voluntary, okay? So everyone has to make that decision for themselves. All those decisions about what can be given and what a family can absorb in terms of losing someone to the war, these are all made at the personal and family level.
I'm willing to enlist when eligible single men have been called up, as I do not see my way clear to leave my wife and child to do for themselves while so many single men with
what do we get?
So the thing that blows me away about these stories all the time is this impact that the 2 wars had on these regional towns in your area.
Yeah, look, that story, actually there are two stories, that one and the Stoker's Store story, which gives a more personal account of loss. And I think that one was a really very moving story that Kent Mayo talks about, finding a trunk in the old stoker's store, and inside the trunk there were letters that a mother wrote to her son. And she was writing the letters not knowing that he was already dead, because when he got to France, he disembarked, and 3 weeks later he was dead.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I need to point out that unlike the Uralla Story Project, which was a collection of stories and involved people coming in couples, the Uralla Soundtrail sort of changed direction somewhat, and that as Andrew's saying, they're probably more produced stories, but they're also able to be heard on location. So, of course, if you download the Uralla Soundtrail and you walk through Elmer Park, you're able to stand on that beautiful little bridge which goes across the little swampy bit there, and you're able to hear the Call to Arms story in its full splendour. And that's really, in some ways, to my mind, kind of what really lifts these stories up. What do you think about that, Andrew?
I feel a bit offended that you call our lovely little creek a swamp. We'll let you get away with that one, Hamish. You're a visitor.
And of course, Elmer Park was today it's a sort of a memorial park where there's a number of veterans plaques in there. But I think it's really interesting with location-based media like Soundtrails, and I think Soundtrails, to my mind, is doing it pretty well. The way in which they're really able to kind of bring to life these voices, these stories, these deep sort of ancestral connections that a town like yours has to these stories and to these historical events.
Absolutely. Look, it kind of reminds me of a year ago now with the first Sound Walk September, where I walked the trail with a group of people, and we had a Bluetooth speaker, so everyone could kind of share the sound as we walked around and talked between the story zones, and it was great to share the stories on location. Yeah.
Do you think that listening to stories creates something of a different experience than if you're just listening, say, online or on the radio?
Listening on location, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think you're standing outside the building that you're talking about. You're talking about Ozzie Miller outside the supermarket and sweeping the path every morning for, I think he worked there for 50 years, and so you can imagine these people. It just brings so much more to the story than and it's not like the difference between a recording and a movie, for example, because it has this strange kind of, once removed, you're not seeing the actual visuals, but you're in the place. It's quite an unusual experience, I found.
Yeah, I mean, you could even say that the place is part of the whole story. The place is almost like as much part of the story as the story is.
Oh, it is. It is. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got one more that we want to play today, and that is yours truly, Arnold Good. Do you want to give us a sense of who Arnold was and the significance that he had within the local community?
Look, Arnold was actually probably the person that I talked about at the beginning of this conversation, because he was always the person that people wanted to record, because he was an historian, a farmer, and had the most amazing memory for the history of Uralla. And he's probably the reason that I was interested in collecting stories and being a part of it. And I guess, although we did collect a lot of recordings of Arnold, he went to the grave with a lot of stories untold, I'm sure.
Yeah, and he really brought people together, didn't he?
Oh, he did. He was a very generous, a true gentleman. Lovely man, and always had time for people, and was very generous with his time. And he would lead people on expeditions around Uralla and around, out to Danga's lagoon and up on Mount Mutton and the goldfields, and yeah.
And I think we've got today's story, which is one of the last ones in the Uralla Soundtrail. And we've got today's story coming to us. It's positioned right at the base of Mount Mutton, and it commands a beautiful view right out back across the town, doesn't it, Andrew?
It's a lovely view, yeah. And whenever I hear that story, I can see that view.
Okay, so let's have a listen to Arnold. And we'll get that to go away, and we're over here, and we'll get that to go away. I do not like that little thing. Okay, here we go. So this is a story from Arnold. It's at the base of Mount Mutton in the Uralla Soundtrail, one of the last stories in the Soundtrail.
Just before it goes to the ridge of Mount Mutton. Mount Mutton, because the sheep station was here, the sheep station belonging to Somers Station, and of course sheep always walk to the highest ground to camp of a night time. We're looking due east down Hill Street. We're looking towards the top of the dividing range is only about 5 kilometres away. There's a lagoon on the eastern side called Danga's Lagoon, and that was taken up by Henry Danga. That became known as Gostwick, and anything on this side of the lagoon is called Sommer. It was taken up in the 1834 by the Henry de Merrick, yes. Born in 1931. I remember I was born about 200 metres away from here in a little lying-in home called Elmhurst, after the government decreed that all white babies should be born in hospitals. They weren't actually hospitals, they were just accommodation for the mothers who came in from out in the 40 kilometres out, rattled in on a horse and sulky. Just imagine the state she would have been when she arrived here, and she'd lie in for a fortnight until the bub was born, and she'd lie in for another 7 days before she was allowed out of bed, and then she'd lie in for about another 10 days, and then she'd go back home again. And that was her holiday for the year, one bub. I have heard Mr. Mulvane told me, and the Mulvanes came in the 1880s, that when they first came here, the tops of Mount Mutton, in every tree there was a koala. And that would be the 1890s and 1900s. And you can see the advertisements in the paper. Wanted any bear pelts, bring them into the skin buyer, the local. They could come here and shoot a nice koala. It would sit quietly in the tree to just sit there to be shot.
Oh, that's so sort of wonderful to hear Arnold's voice, but it's really sad to hear how quickly the koalas were sort of, shot off the trees, your local trees on Mount Mutton. It's really a great shame. But coming back to Arnold, I think the thing that really endears me to him is the sense that he was so very generous with the information that he had, and he was really passionate about your town, wasn't he?
Absolutely. Look, he there wasn't anything that, he had such a depth of information on all sorts of things. I mean, another aspect of history in Uralla that Arnold was very knowledgeable about, and we collected a lot of stories about, was the Foundry History and the old lace-making foundry that's just to the southeast of the village. And look, yeah. So the farming history, the
mining history,
the mining history, it was all there in Arnold. And you always got the feeling if you didn't quite know, he'd make it up. But I shouldn't say that. He did have a tremendous wealth of information.
He did.
And, look, there has been a lot of work done he did leave a lot of notes behind, and people at the Uralla Historical Society have gathered information, and there's been a lot of work done since his passing.
So, Andrew, that sort of brings us kind of to the end of this conversation. I suppose the last thing I'd like to ask you before we finish up was you've got a body of audio recordings that are in your library, I believe, under the Uralla Story Project. There's the Uralla Soundtrail that builds on those stories and adds in some extra ones. Where to for your community in terms of digital storytelling?
Look, I think we need to look at. I mean, it's 8 years since those original stories were recorded, and look, I think it's really time is overdue to be collecting more, and I think we have the capacity and the knowledge within the community to record our own stories. I mean, it's not difficult, and we can reach out for technical information that we don't have. So I think, and then, you know, it's a matter of adding to the Soundtrails as well, and look at other Soundtrails and in other parts of Uralla. So, I think it's just really the beginning. Yeah. And what I really liked about the story project was to have that methodology of collecting stories, and I really liked the conversational aspect. It wasn't question answer. It was two people there was a genuine transfer of information from one person to another, or two people having a conversation that they were equally invested in, like Bill and Richie. Yeah. So I think we really have a great legacy in those stories, and it's just really a matter of building on that methodology, because it's all there. Yeah,
I think for your community, with such a resource that you've already got, and to build on that, I think you really you've got a really good opportunity here to really punch above your weight in terms of reflecting who you are as a community, in terms of celebrating your stories, your memory holders, the connections that you have to each other and to place. So, you know, I just really want to congratulate everyone in Uralla who's been involved in these projects to date. And if you haven't done the Uralla Soundtrail, I'd really invite you to download it. Make sure you've got Wi-Fi, download the Uralla Soundtrail, and it starts outside the Visitor Information Centre. And who is the narrator, Andrew?
Oh, look, I don't know who he is. He was some blowen, I think.
It's you. It's Andrew. Andrew's the narrator for the Uralla Soundtrail. So if you haven't had enough of his voice, you can just have more.
Right. Look, I would also like to acknowledge your part in this, Hamish, and Helen. If it wasn't for that chance meeting with Helen, and Helen being receptive to my overtures to get you people down to Uralla, this wouldn't have happened either. So big vote of thanks goes out to you too.
And the terrific thing is now, of course, is that you pretty much know how this whole shebang works. And so whether you were to do another Soundtrail or whether you were to do another community audio recording project, I think you've got pretty much the tools in place to really take a bit more control at this point.
Yeah. Look, I agree. And we know where you live, Hamish. So.
Okay, look, thank you so much for your time,
Great.
Andrew. And I just want to say thank you to Claire Campbell and the support that we've had from the Uralla Shire Council in the making of this. Thank you so much, and stay tuned.
Great. Thank you, Hamish.
Bye-bye.